50,000 Chinese students are attending California's universities on student visa. There are talks of potentially revoking some of these student visas. Our guest today is Joshua Philipp, who's an investigative reporter with Epoch Times. He's here to tell us what's happening on university campuses here and why the Chinese Communist Party has invested so much to gain influence inside our universities. He also will share with us his journey of finding all this out.
One of the greatest national security threats to the United States, one of the greatest threats our country faces, would have gone unreported. I decided, yeah, I'm willing to die for this. And if they kill me, it'll make it better known. And so I decided, yeah, I'm not gonna stop, no matter what.
I'm Siamak Korami. Welcome to California Insider. Josh, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Hey, always a pleasure, Siamak. Great to be here too. Yeah, it's awesome.
We want to talk to you about a phenomenon that's happening that could impact California universities big time and Chinese students here. There's talks of revoking visas for Chinese students nationally, and there's 50,000 students here in California that could potentially lose their visas.
It's interesting because I saw Trump make the announcement, and it seems the case that I don't know what the criteria is going to be, but they did suggest they were going to start revoking the visas of, it seemed all Chinese students. But they said especially those with ties to the Chinese Communist Party. So I don't know if that means all of them or some of them or what it means, but that also comes on the heels of the Trump administration trying to pull the ability of Harvard to have foreign exchange students. So it seems like it's impacting all of them. I think this is one of the issues where people are still waiting to see how broadly they're going to implement this. But I can tell you, this is the other side of it.
Because not all of them, there's a number of students that are here legitimately, they're trying to study, but some are linked to the CCP.
And I know many of them. I've met many Chinese students who are very not supportive of the CCP. I know a lot who are just totally non-political and just want to study here. And so as a journalist, I've researched Chinese spy networks quite a bit, including the Chinese spy networks. I can say without a doubt, there are some organizations operating in American universities that are openly controlled by the CCP, funded by the CCP, directed by the CCP. These organizations, this is provable, they even monitor and harm other Chinese students. So, if you were saying you're going to go after the actual provable, dangerous Chinese organizations at universities that are even to an extent persecuting other students, even on human rights grounds, I think absolutely. The other argument would be that the problem is so big that even if you just went after one network, maybe they just, hide it better. So maybe from a national security standpoint, that's what they're looking at. But I can understand both sides. It is a bit extreme, I think, but I can understand both sides.
Can you tell us, in your work, you have actually studied how these networks work.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what they look like?
Okay, so let me break down a couple of them. I think most people by now have heard about the Confucius Institutes. Basically, the Chinese Communist Party goes to universities, and it's not even just universities now. They do this kindergarten through high school, all the way up through college. But a lot of people are now familiar with the Confucius Institutes. The Chinese Communist Party goes to schools, big-time universities, and they say, let us do a foreign Chinese language and culture class at your university. We'll pay for the building. We'll pay for the teachers. You don't have to do anything. In other words, it's like we will pay you to let us build an educational institution at your school. You'll get money from it. You'll have more options for your students. You'll have new language and culture classes. Who wouldn't want that, from a certain standpoint? If a non-hostile country were to do that, it would be a fantastic thing. Of course, who wouldn't want it? It turns out, though, that it comes with strings attached. The Chinese Communist Party, through that, can say, well, now that we're here, if you hold an event we don't approve of, we're pulling out. If you have a speaker on Chinese human rights, we're pulling out. If you have a student group at your school that holds an event about human rights in China, we find that offensive, we'll pull out. And so what happens is the university then has to restrict the freedom of speech of the students. They have to restrict what kind of conversations they can allow on their campuses. And it creates, through that financial channel, a type of what I would call transnational repression. The university then has to censor human rights issues, the speech of students, and
So do
everything
they
else.
come to the university and tell them, because we have the center here, you're not allowed to have certain events?
I don't think they tell them that from the get-go, but there have been documented cases where universities have, for example, held events about human rights abuse in Tibet, for example, or held events about, organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners, for example. And not only do the Confucius Institutes, the Chinese regime behind it, not only do they say, don't hold this event or try to pressure them, they do threaten to pull funding out of the schools. And then there's also other problems. There are normal Chinese citizens, former Chinese expats or something like that in the United States who wanted to become teachers at those school programs. Like, oh, hey, I speak Chinese. They need Chinese language teachers. Why don't I do it? They go there and they find that because the CCP is involved in the hiring process, that they can't get the job. And so these institutions discriminate based on religion, they discriminate based on political views, and it's all in the interest of the Chinese Communist Party. And so even from a normal legal standpoint, even in terms of the Civil Rights Act in the United States, that shouldn't be allowed, right? But what is big about these universities is a lot of people are familiar with that. They're not familiar with the many, many, many other programs. In the lower grades, there's what are called the Little Red Schools, just like Confucius Institutes, but a different name. They have, for example, different programs aimed directly at
They're called the Little Red groups? Is that
Little Red Schools, yeah.
schools?
Yeah,
and they're in that
in American
K through
schools.
12, or
I don't know the exact grades, but they're lower school grades. They're very active, for example, like Arizona and stuff. The CCP is behind that. They do that as well. They have organizations that target, for example, researchers. There's people might have heard of the Torch program. That's a program where the CCP will target researchers receiving government grants at American universities, including grad students and so on. They have open spy programs that try to recruit these people. I mean, almost too many to list. But when you talk specifically about Chinese student spies, one of the main operations they have, there's an organization run by the Chinese consulates, directed by it, and funded by them. And they're called the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations. And so these Chinese Student Scholar Associations, right, these are openly, in their own writing, funded by the CCP, directed by the CCP, operated by the CCP, and can be used by the CCP for a lot of terrible things. I'll get into some of the nuts and bolts of it, but as a bit of background to this, I've been exposing this going back to 2008. A lot of my research as a journalist, I mean, I started at Epoch Times when I was still a student. I've just stuck with it. A lot of my research started with my investigations into what's called the United Front Work Department, which is one of the main branches of the Chinese Communist Party focused on foreign espionage.
What you're saying is they're on campus. These are student groups.
Yes.
But they're actually funded by the Chinese Communist Party, and they actually work for the Chinese Communist Party? How does that work?
In their own words. When I was exposing the Chinese Communist Party's operations of subversion, I was doing a lot of on-the-ground investigations. Some of these were into, Chinese CCP-tied organizations like community groups and, friendship associations and business groups that were tied directly into the CCP. Because going back to 2008, the Beijing Olympics, a lot of these organizations were coming to the surface. They were protesting against any critics of the CCP. If a news outlet said anything about, the bloody Olympics, as they called it at the time, because the CCP at the time was very publicly persecuting Tibetans, especially in China. They were suppressing all Chinese dissidents, and they were launching attacks through these networks against any groups abroad. So if there was a Chinese group in the United States, New York, San Francisco, there were actual cases of it. If there were any Chinese groups anywhere who were, holding public demonstrations against the bloody Olympics, because the CCP was increasingly becoming authoritarian at the time, they were finding that they would have these large groups come out, Chinese students, Chinese business associations, and what he called tongs, and they were criticizing people, sometimes beating people up, attacking people, spitting on them, cursing at them, threatening to kill them. And I was, at the time, investigating who are these people. Now, I've talked a lot about my research into the Tongs, the Chinese associations tied in with the CCP's United Front work. But one thing that's not talked about as much, and I even haven't talked about it as much, are the Chinese student and scholar associations. A lot of those Chinese student protesters, they're part of the Chinese student and scholar associations. And that's the exact name they use.
Chinese Scholar Association.
Chinese Student and Scholar Associations, that's their official name. Now, this is where it gets interesting. If you really research them, this is what you find. If you go to the Chinese Communist Party's embassy website, they have an academic branch of the Chinese embassy, and on their official website, they list all of these associations, and they list every university they're part of. They have it public. What's also interesting, they have since pulled that offline. They deleted the web page. Now, I don't know what their intent is. My personal belief would be that they don't want people knowing that the Chinese embassy is openly funding and operating these organizations, and maybe they're trying to cover their tracks. I saved the archive, and so this is, even though deleted, it still exists.
What are they trying to achieve? So you mentioned that they have the Confucius Institutes, that they try to teach the Chinese culture, but I'm sure it's kind of the type of culture they want to show. But what else do they want to achieve using this?
So this ties into something pretty big. It ties into a few things. If you want to break it down, big picture, it is intellectual property theft. A lot of universities have research programs funded by taxpayers. Even Pentagon, we have military-funded research programs being done at major American universities. We have medical research funded by taxpayers at universities. We have technology research. And a lot of these universities, they get research grants. Those research programs are open to foreign students. And the CCP, you have to imagine if you have, for example, a Chinese-controlled grad student, part of the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations, or even just targeted for it, they can get their professors, oftentimes, the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations is not just students, it's also professors and faculty at universities, and even external figures in the public, which include the Tong leaders. So the actual subversive networks, it's the entire leadership behind this.
So it's the professors, it's the students, and then there's the community, some community leaders.
And faculty. And so what happens is they can pick the students they want and then give them access to these things. They can push them into it. So on one side, you have, of course, the research programs. Those are valuable for, imagine, and this happens, American taxpayers fund a weapons program. And then those Chinese students working with this organization go back to China and they bring the research with them. Even if they don't steal it, which they often do, they go with the knowledge. And then what do we find? We find, 2 years later, the thing that we paid to have researched at X university is now being developed by the Chinese military. Very commonly happens, very often. Aside from that brain drain, you have the issue, of course, of just Chinese narrative. They want to defend narratives and they want to push narratives. For example, they will try to use their influence to protest against any kind of maybe student event or public debate or anything. Anything that would make the Chinese Communist Party look bad. Human rights issues, Taiwan independence, Hong Kong democracy, you name it, right? Trade issues, even tariffs now probably. Those types of things. If they hold an event on that, the faculty, the students, the key figures in the community will work together and they'll protest it. They'll lobby the dean of the university. They'll complain to the professor. They will go to the organizers of the event and say, how dare you hold this because it's offensive to the feelings of the Chinese people. Like they use that, right? And so they on one side prevent that. On the other side, they can then rally their own networks to hold positive events. So they can get, for example, all those Chinese leaders to hold like friendship meetings or China-U.S. economic engagement meetings and things like that, business opportunity meetings. They can have people come and facilitate, travel to China where they get business, Chinese students to go to, or, normal students to, in the U.S. to go to China for like Chinese business exchange things, things like that. They manipulate it. So they destroy certain narratives and they prop up others. But the big one, I think, is something else. The most serious threat on a national security level, even beyond brain drain and losing like government-funded weapons research programs to China because of this. The biggest threat is embedded spies. Because what the CCP can do, if they go to Harvard, for example, and in Harvard, there was a great Wall Street Journal article recently. They said the Chinese Communist Party leadership, they call Harvard their party school. They say that Harvard has trained a massive number of Chinese Communist Party officials. And so they target it, right? The biggest threat you have is they come to these universities and then they are raised, grown through these networks, tied in, the event funding comes from the Chinese consulates or the Chinese consul general and the Tongs. The support networks are all the Chinese spy networks. And they can take these Chinese students and drag them up through the ranks effectively and then say, what business do we want you in? Maybe a Chinese student studies law. Maybe they want a Chinese spy working in the Justice Department. They can oversee the development of that Chinese student. They can write letters of recommendation, and that student, through them pushing, can then apply for a job in the Justice Department. Maybe they want a Chinese student in the FDA because maybe they want to have something to clear the way for Chinese trade on like pharmaceuticals. Same thing. They can have the entire CCP network support their development. They can have them write letters of recommendation. They can do engagement programs. Look how influential the student is with China. And they can push that student along as a career into a government position. They can do that in local politics. They can do that in key businesses. They can do that in law enforcement. They can do it, maybe they want to have someone join the military or join the FBI, or maybe even run for political office, for example. This is the method the CCP uses to place spies, agents of influence, or otherwise within our government.
Doesn't it take a long time? They're just doing that, right? Is that?
Well, let's put it this way. I've been researching this since 2008. And it was in 2008, it had already been going on for a while. That was, 20 years ago, almost. This has been going on at least 20 years. Because when I was researching it, it was at that time. How many students are now old enough to have gotten official positions in our own government? A lot. And every year, every single year, they're graduating and going into new jobs. And every single year, it's not just one university. If you go by the Chinese embassy website, the one they deleted, which we have the archives of, if you go by the actual Chinese government website, the embassy website, they list them. And there are dozens upon dozens, tons of them, just a long list of American universities. And imagine how many, look, one spy is a problem. One Chinese agent in a government position is problematic, especially when you get to like middle-level bureaucracies and they have a lot of power. One of them is problematic. Imagine 10, imagine 20, imagine 100, imagine 1,000. By this point, they would have trained thousands upon thousands upon thousands.
Now, Josh, there's another side to this because there's a lot of good Chinese people that are not tied with any of this, and they probably work very hard to get to those careers.
And I feel terrible for them. I was actually talking to a Chinese friend about this recently, and she was telling me that she has a nephew who's from China. He's currently studying at a university in the U.S. I won't say where because he might get targeted if we say it. He's afraid of losing his visa. He's afraid of getting sent back to China. I personally know some Chinese dissidents who came to the United States to study and they defected while they were here. I know a lot of them. I know, and the woman who told me that her nephew was here studying, she told me that when she came here as a student, and she came here as a student also, a long time ago now, she said when she came here, a Chinese agent pulled her aside and said, "Remember, you serve the motherland." And she told me, because I was like, "Well, what do you think about all this?" She's like, "Good." She said, "Good." She said, because every Chinese who comes here and studies knows that the CCP will try to pressure you to become a spy. Now, that doesn't mean every one of them is going to spy. You have a lot of, I'd probably say the majority of them don't do it. But
there's
every
a lot
one
of
of them,
pressure on them to become.
it's how the CCP works. And especially if you do something the CCP wants. Like if you come here and you don't do anything of special interest to the CCP, maybe you don't get to these government-funded research programs, or they don't think you have the potential to get a job in the U.S. government, they might not care about you. If you do decide you want to go back to China, they will interview you. They'll say, "Oh, so what did you know?" And it might be something friendly. You might get a call from just a local business leader, for example. Might not even be the Chinese spy agent. So it's not like the head of the local Chinese police is going to call you up to meet. Maybe they will, depending on what it is, but for the most part, no. You might get a call from a local Chinese business leader in China saying, "Hey, I heard you studied in America. I'm very interested in what you learned. How would you like to have lunch with me? My treat, or dinner with me, my treat." You'll go there. You'll sit down at the table. They'll wine and dine you and say, "So what did you study?" "Oh, you were in a research program? Oh, so interesting. I'm also researching this. Let me show you what I did." And they might not ask you, "Give me your research." They'll volunteer what they do. Say, "Oh, look what we're doing. We're developing maybe new camera technology, maybe medical research. Maybe medical research is probably a better example. We're developing this new medication. And we're kind of stuck at this point right here. We can't figure out." The student, "Oh, I researched that. I worked on a program working on that exact issue." The student wants a job, obviously. If you're applying for a job, don't you want to make a point? "Oh, I worked on the very thing you need." Applying for any job, of course you're going to do that. But what the student doesn't know is that guy already knew the student was working on that. That guy already knew.
It's all orchestrated.
It's orchestrated. And that's how it works. Now, on one side, you call that brain drain. You call that just how it works in every country on earth when they have foreign students come here and they go back to their own countries and they get jobs in the industry they learn because obviously they studied it. But when you have a country doing it through their intelligence operations, where they're doing this intentionally, and to the point where they're using it as a type of like business warfare against us, trying to undermine our own economy by undercutting us on the markets, or using it to build weapons and so on, then it's problematic. And for the CCP, this is the modus operandi. This is how it operates. This is how the whole system works for them.
So how can people know the difference? Is there a way for people to find out who is who, or the administration to monitor like who's?
Well, this is the problem with the Chinese Communist Party. Like if you listen to some really loud public voices about the CCP, a lot of people who understand the CCP say the only solution is total disengagement. And that may sound extreme, and maybe that's what Trump's even doing on the, because what does that look like? Well, it looks like Trump basically banning the visas of all Chinese students. That's what disengagement looks like. It looks like us restricting certain sales of, Chinese technology or products on our markets. It might look like sanctions against very large Chinese businesses like Huawei and ZTE. Those are two of the biggest ones we saw with that. But the argument they have is that the problem is not the Chinese people. And this is the big issue you have. The problem is not the Chinese people. The problem is how the Chinese Communist Party manipulates them. The problem is the Chinese Communist Party's authoritarian laws that manipulate even their access to our open system. And for the Chinese Communist Party, there's no such thing as an independent business. There's no such thing as an independent researcher. There's no such thing.
They all belong to the government.
No, they all do. I mean,
but even though they look like they have opened up the economy, right?
It's all run by the CCP. Now, that doesn't apply so much for like the really small businesses or the very small researchers. Like if you're not good at what you do, if you're not successful, they might not care. But as soon as you reach any level of prominence, the CCP is going to come knocking at your door and saying, "Time to join the party or you're done." Join the party where it's the gulag or you're out of business, or we're going to take over your business. That happened to Jack Ma, Alibaba, for example. They pushed him out, took over his business, because he criticized the CCP. If you're a medium or large business, you have to have a Communist Party cell. You have to make all of your data, all of your research viewable, accessible by the Chinese Communist Party. If you do foreign investment, all foreign investment is regulated by the CCP. You can't even invest without the oversight of the Chinese Communist Party, at least not on a large scale. And so anything that is of interest to the CCP, they control, no exceptions. And when you're dealing with a country like that, where there is no such thing as independence, there is no such thing as an independent researcher or an independent scholar or an independent business leader, how do you deal with that when the country is openly hostile towards yours and is trying to steal the things when you're trying to be nice to people on an individual level? Because you know that not all of them are bad. You know there are plenty of good people. How do you deal with that? And that's the challenge America has.
For those students that are not part of the CCP, they're not connected, and they're here to genuinely study and want to have a better life in America, what is it like for them to navigate all of this?
Well, you're going to get pressured. I mean, if you're not doing anything important, maybe not so much. Like there are plenty of Chinese students who come here and study and they just do their own things and maybe they integrate more with the society and not a big deal. But if you become successful, if you have a breakthrough, if you get involved in anything that is relevant to the CCP's interests, then they will want you. Even aside from maybe research programs or business opportunities, even if you develop good connections, they'll want your connections. And, to the point of, again, Wall Street Journal had a great article talking about how the CCP regards Harvard University as their party school. And they said it's not even just Harvard, it's all the top universities. Why is that valuable? Well, aside from the fact that they can use it to get involved in all these programs, that they can use it to infiltrate parts of our government, they also develop connections. They get to know the future business leaders in America. They get to know the future government officials in America. They get to know the top investors and everybody else who has any say in our country, because those universities do tend to work as the kind of direct channels into different areas of influence within the society. And so through their interpersonal connections, they then can use that for espionage, which they do very aggressively. But, to your point of your average Chinese student, right? Let's say they don't do any of that. They come here, they fall in love with America. Maybe they want to go back to China, but they don't do anything big. They just want to work a normal job or whatever else, right? What is life like for them? Let's say they get interested. Maybe they're on YouTube here, or maybe they get an American cell phone and they turn on YouTube and they're like, "What's this? What is June 4th?" And never heard of that.
The Tiananmen Square massacre, right?
Yeah, what is June 4th? Why are Americans talking about June 4th? You might have seen Marco Rubio was talking about, Nancy Pelosi was talking about it, condemning the Chinese Communist Party for the June 4th massacre. In America, this is a bipartisan issue. So if you're in America as a student, you're going to see it. So a Chinese student may be watching TV or hanging out with their friends, and the friends are like, "Oh, what do you think of the Tiananmen Square massacre?" The Chinese student's like, "What? Never heard of it." And why is that? It's because in China, you can't, it doesn't exist, If you want to ask Chinese AI DeepSeek, "Hey, say June 4th, it can't do it. It can't even do it. And so, so what happens? This Chinese student turns on the internet and they watch this video and they're like, "Oh my gosh, the Communist Party, the CCP, they massacred Chinese students? Did this really happen? Why did I never hear about it?" And then you have the risk that they have that, scene from The Matrix, Neo takes the red pill and he's suddenly wakes up out of the pod and realizes the world isn't what he thought it was, They go through it and they're like, they covered up this is not true, this is not true, this is not true. And they have that moment, I've been lied to my entire life. And for some of them, it's a shocking moment. I remember I had a friend, she was telling me in Chinese school, they had slogan class and they tell you all these stories about famous Chinese Communist Party heroes. She said that when she was a kid, she really idolized some of them. And when she came to study in America, she found out all the stories were fabricated. They were fake. And she never knew. And so, for the CCP, that's okay, you've crossed the danger zone thing. You've gone over the line and now you are a threat to the party because you know the truth. Then what happens? Well, the Chinese student can keep it to themselves. They can,
Which
pretend.
a lot of people do that probably.
And a lot of them do it because they don't. For Chinese, they call it not getting involved in politics. It's not like us where, again, we're a free society, you can vote and stuff like that. For them, not getting involved in politics means it's none of your business and keep your mouth shut, basically, you know what I mean? But let's say, for example, they realize, hey, the CCP has been abusing the Chinese people. Maybe they find out about organ harvesting of Falun Gong. Maybe they find out about slave labor of Muslim Uyghurs. Maybe they find out that the American government is talking about this. Maybe they see that American Congress signed the Falun Gong Protection Act, condemning the CCP for organ harvesting. Like, wow, the American government is talking about this.
Because Falun Gong is a big issue in China, right? They don't allow any.
One of the biggest on the human rights front. But I'll talk about that too, because for them that's a big issue. So what happens then? Maybe that Chinese student then says, hey, there's an event coming up at my school where they're going to talk about organ harvesting. Or there's an event coming up at my school where they're going to talk about, genocide in Tibet, cultural genocide in Tibet, or anything like that. And so they want to go. The student goes to the event. They might see that, the Chinese Student Scholar Associations are protesting, but like, I'm going to go anyway. They will have their name reported to the Chinese consulate. Those other Chinese student groups, they work as the eyes and ears of the CCP. They're spies, effectively, right? You would normally call that being a spy. So they also monitor the other Chinese students. They watch them. They will take photos, and I've seen this firsthand at protests, at human rights events. They'll take photos of them. If you're standing with banners, right, you see a lot of people protesting, they'll go up to every person and they'll take a photo of them. And they do it, they project it because they're sending a message.
They want them to know
they're trying to intimidate them. They'll go up to them like this, put the camera right in their face and take a photo. And they'll go down the line, person by person by person. They'll do that to take pictures of the audiences. They'll take pictures of, the speakers. They'll do it to everybody. If you dare to become not only an attendee where you've dared to listen to this, but you dare to speak out, they will target your family. And what'll happen is this. You might get a call from your mom back in China, and she says, hey, the Chinese police came to our house today and says that you're engaging in terrorism, because this is what they call it, right? They actually call it terrorism in China.
So if you go protest, is essentially
you're terrorizing the Communist Party. You know what I mean? By calling them out for abusing the Chinese people. They might call it terrorism, or you're getting involved in foreign spies, or you're getting involved in foreign hostile activities. We need you to come back. Maybe they'll revoke your visa on the Chinese side. Maybe you'll lose your ability to stay in the United States. Maybe every door in China that used to be open to you has now closed. Your social credit score, wrecked. You might never get a job again. Your entire hope of a future decimated. And that's what they face. And again, that's because of these eyes and ears of the CCP at these universities that are somehow allowed to do it. We let them do it. Publicly, and I don't know why that's allowed, actually. And so then what else happens? Well, you mentioned Falun Gong, of course, right? So the Chinese Communist Party does horrible things. There's two stories of China. One story is the story of the Chinese Communist Party in its own words. The other story is the story of the Chinese Communist Party in the words of the Chinese people, and it's very different stories. The real story of the Chinese... So if you go to a lot of universities and you listen to what's being taught by visiting Chinese professors, and you'll be shocked by how many government officials and military leaders and everybody else think this because it's what they were taught in school. They believe in the century of humiliation, as they call it. So what's the story with this? In China, right? The Chinese Communist Party came to power because the Kuomintang was fighting against the Japanese, right? The KMT. They were the real government of China. They fought the Japanese. A lot of during World War II, they were the ones fighting it. The CCP was like a group of bandits. They would go in afterwards and kill whoever lost the battle, basically, you know what I mean? Or they'd sit on the sidelines and do nothing. Or they'd put on the uniforms of the KMT and go and commit acts of terror, massacring villages so that people would think the KMT did it. That was the Communist Party of China. Bunch of scoundrels and, thugs, basically. After the war, KMT was decimated. The CCP sat on the sidelines. And so, other than a couple very minor battles, most of it was fought by the KMT. CCP comes out and then beats the KMT, of course, because, they had not really fought the war. It was on the other side of it. Then what happens, right? The Chinese Communist Party goes, unfortunately America tries to create peace there, maybe fortunately, unfortunately. That allows the CCP to regroup. Civil war in China, KMT's pushed back to Taiwan. The CCP takes over China up until Jimmy Carter, like the 70s and stuff. We recognize Taiwan as the government in exile. They're the real government of China. The CCP is the unofficial government. That only changed under Jimmy Carter. And then what happens, right? During that time, what does the CCP do? CCP takes power. They destroy Chinese culture. They launch the Cultural Revolution. If you have flowers in front of your house, they might kill you for it. They tell you to kill your teacher. They tell you to kill your parents or whatever, kill your landlord. You have the Little Red Guard, who are just a terrorist organization, massacring people, killing people, just committing horrible acts. You have famines caused by bad CCP policy, like killing all the sparrows, which eat the bugs, and so the bugs eat all the crops. You have programs of getting all the iron, and so people melt down their farming equipment and give it to the CCP, and they have nothing to toil their fields with. Crops fail, people starve to death by the millions, just millions upon millions. Then you have other programs. You get into the Cultural Revolution, where they destroy all of Chinese traditional culture. They destroy the memory of who they were. And then you have other things leading up finally to, the leading up to the Tiananmen Square massacre, when people think communism is dying in Europe. Maybe it'll die in China too. And the CCP runs them over with tanks and massacres them with guns, right? And so what does the CCP do? Then they do reform and opening up. Hey, we're different now, right after the massacre. Then they launch the persecution of Falun Gong, 1999, just 10 years after that. And they begin a persecution of 70 million to 100 million people. They never changed. They never changed. Nothing has changed. They still have slavery. They take people's organs while they're still alive for profit, a for-profit killing of religious believers. The CCP has never changed its nature. But what it did in terms of narratives was this. They say, oh, that was the century, that we're recovering from the century of humiliation. The Chinese people were savage, and the Communist Party freed them from it. Right? That's the narrative.
So that's what they're teaching.
This is what they teach at schools. They teach this at American universities.
So that history, the 100 years of all the stuff that you talked about.
Well, they blame it on the West because, of course, you had the Opium Wars, you had the other things. America wasn't part of that, but they try to drag America into it now. Up until the Korean War, they would acknowledge that America never invaded China. Up until the Korean War, when, of course, we went to war with North Korea and the CCP. But until then, that was not the narrative. They would say, oh, well, China was humiliated. We went through all this pain, and the CCP freed us from it, right? That's their narrative. When in reality, the CCP was the greatest abuser of the Chinese people probably in history. You're talking just under Mao Zedong, 50 to 100 million people, different estimates killed by the CCP. So, some say conservative estimate, 50 million to 70 million people. Then what happens, right? Well, Falun Gong persecution. The CCP launches a persecution against people who believe in truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. People who do nothing other than, effectively practicing what looks like Tai Chi, healthy movements. If you've ever seen those videos of people doing the slow movements at the parks, it's, Qigong, they would call it. Tai Chi is a form of Qigong. And what do? Well, too many people practice it. The CCP regards it as a threat to their power. They decimate it, as they've done in every other instance. And then what happens, right? Well, the CCP is a means to protect itself, right? To protect itself against the Chinese people trying to bring back their culture, trying to protect itself against the, coming back of like normal morality, or just out of jealousy, right? They were never a threat to the country by any means. They launched one of the largest persecutions the world has ever seen. And then what does the rest of the world do? I mean, crickets, silence. And I would say a lot of that, well, and I should give some credit. There have been a lot of public officials who have really done incredible work stepping forward. But the problem we have is because of the interconnectedness of industry, of businesses and otherwise, or universities, for example, or Hollywood working with China, or media not wanting to lose their visas in China. Most people won't touch these things. A lot of them won't touch these things because if you touch it, if you talk about it, they kick you out. And so, it goes back to the question then, is it responsible for us to let them do that? Is it better to say, okay, fine, we'll engage with you. Maybe it'll make you change. Maybe you'll become better if we let your students come here. Maybe it'll make you better if we build our factories in your country. I think we can look at the experience and say, no, not only has it not made China more free, not only has it not helped the Chinese people be less persecuted by the CCP, not only has it meant they become less communistic, not only has none of that happened, they still carry out massive genocides and persecution as we speak. Not only has none of that happened in terms of them, changing, they have manipulated those open systems to make us complicit in it. They've manipulated those open systems to make us shut our mouths, to make professors not dare to talk about human rights in China, to make it so that, Enes Kanter Freedom in the NBA, writing a human rights message on his shoe, gets punished by the NBA for doing it. That Hollywood films censor.
Here.
It's come here. We've allowed them to not only be quiet, make us be quiet, we've allowed them to let us even become complicit to an extent, where Chinese Communist Party censorship against the abuse of the Chinese people themselves is somehow regarded as offensive to China. How is that? That if you talk about, it's like if your neighbor's beating his wife and you criticize him for beating his wife and he says, well, you're being mean to my family. I think you're the one being mean to your family if you're beating your wife. You know what I mean? That's the relationship they have. And so you can't talk about Chinese human rights issues without the CCP trying to attack you for it.
By now, you should know that we are part of the Epoch Times newspaper. Having this paper associated with us, we are able to get story ideas and a lot of sources. Now, this week's paper had one amazing story about what's happening with the Tijuana sewage crisis. We actually have been covering this crisis on the show. Now we are hearing that the sewage is actually going airborne and miles away into the San Diego coast, up to even La Jolla. There's also another story that's fascinating in the paper. It's about equitable grading. Remember, California Insider, we covered equitable grading from all perspectives, from the parents to the teachers, the people that actually created equity grading program, and superintendents of schools who implemented it. Now, San Francisco just rejected the equity grading method for the school district, and the paper has the story in it. We have a special deal for you. You can subscribe for $1 a week for the digital edition. You can also get the print. You will be surprised by the quality of journalism that goes into this paper. Now let's go back to the interview. So you're a journalist, right? And do you feel any threat yourself for doing this kind of work?
To be honest, yes. But it may sound funny, but I'm kind of used to it. That doesn't sound odd. In my work as a journalist, I mean, basically, this is how my career happened. Back, 20 years ago now, almost 20 years, 2006, I've been with Epoch Times. I was still a student at the time. So I was actually going to school, Southwestern College, San Diego, right? Just community school. And I was in a journalistic program there, just starting my studies. Basically, here's what happened. The professor at my school said, okay, guys, if you can get articles published in a local media, I'll give you an A. And so I was submitting articles to all kinds of local Chinese news, or local San Diego newspapers. I was very much into human rights at the time. So I sent an article to Epoch Times, 2006. They published it. I said, fantastic. I actually got in the San Diego Reader too, totally different story. I was just doing local events, just small things back then, just fun, light stories. I mean, I was a student, right? So I wasn't doing anything impactful. Epoch Times liked my work though. And so, they asked me, hey, you want to write again? I said, yeah, I want to write again. So I started writing for them more. That went on until about 2008, and they offered me a summer internship. I mentioned earlier, 2008 was also leading up to the Beijing Olympics, the Bloody Olympics. The Chinese Communist Party, all of its agents, again, the Chinese Student Scholars Associations, the United Front, the Tongs, they were all out in force. They were, again, San Francisco, I believe LA, but they were also really active in New York. In New York City, you had huge groups of these people coming out, hundreds of them. And they were beating people up, they were attacking people, they were spitting on people, they were threatening to kill people. I had a Taiwanese woman tell me they told her they could make her disappear. Her son is in the U.S. Army. They told her they could make her disappear. And so I got assigned to go cover that. And what happened was this. You had Chinese human rights activists. It was mostly democracy activists, House Christians, and Falun Gong practitioners who were being attacked by these CCP agents. And I mean, I'm out there and, all the protesters are like, those people attacking us are Chinese spies. And, at that time, I thought spies, I knew spies from the movies. I was thinking refined, drinking like cognac and stuff like that and playing poker. I didn't think
like James Bond. Or
I was thinking I was thinking refined people. These were like just really trashy looking people. They look like a bunch of gang members. You know what I mean? They look like thugs. And so I was like, those aren't spies. They're like, no, they're spies. This is what the Chinese Communist Party does. They send these people. And I was like, okay, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But I mean, I didn't have any concept of this stuff at the time. I started noticing patterns. When these groups were coming out, they'd have banners, condemning anybody criticizing the CCP for human rights abuses. And on the banners would be names like the Fujian American Association, or the Shandong Association, or the Peking Association, things like that. On their bullhorns would be the names of these Chinese associations. And I was like, what are these? I start researching them and I find out these organizations all have ties to the Chinese consulates, that they're meeting with heads of the Chinese Communist Party, that when the CCP leaders come and visit, they have speeches and events with these Chinese organizations. I'm like, wow, what are these? I start to find out these are what you call tongs, Tongs. Then I start to find out that underneath some of these tongs are the Chinese mafia. And so I was like, oh, well, that explains why they look like a bunch of gang members. It's because they are a bunch of gang members. Under the Fujian American Association, under that, they had the Fuqing Gang. They're one of the largest transnational organized crime groups in the world. They're human traffickers, drug traffickers, sex traffickers, you name it. They ran what was called the Golden Venture. It was one of the largest human trafficking incidents and the most deadly ones ever recorded in America. A huge Chinese ship ran aground off the coast of New York, crashed, people drowned. It was cold, freezing waters. A lot of people died. That was the Fuqing Gang, which operates under the Fujian American Association. They were one of the largest groups involved. They're also one of the closest groups in New York to the CCP. And then I found out direct involvement from the Chinese Consulate General at the time, Peng Ke-yu, meeting with them. And so as I started exposing this stuff, they started to know about me. And I remember walking around and I'd hear them whisper stuff, right? Like it started getting a little weird. There were several times when, one time, for example, I was covering a court case where an individual who had attacked another Chinese individual, attacked a human rights advocate, right? Was standing trial, got charged for it. And they had CCP agents in there. One of them turned around in their seats and started whispering, "I will kill you," to me. Another time I was walking down the street, covering this stuff. I got surrounded. It was probably around six or so people surrounded me and started threatening to kill me. I had a contact tell me, because I was able to get some people to come forward. I mean, it was really hard to get people to come forward. But I had some people have meetings with me. One incident, I had a person say, okay, meet me on the corner of this street, at nighttime. A car will flash its lights twice. Get in the car, we'll drive somewhere and I'll tell you everything. And I mean, it was that kind of reporting. I had one of my contacts that I managed to get, he told me the CCP, because I published an article, he didn't care. He said that one of these guys told him they hired a hitman to chop off one of his hands. And he said that morning he woke up and the tires of his car were all slashed. And so
how did you keep going?
Well, I'll be honest, I did a bit of soul searching. And so I had to go through a moment where I had to think, is it worth dying for? Because at that time, when I was exposing these things, there was not a lot of public reporting on it. These days you can see reporting on the secret Chinese police stations. That's what I was exposing in 2008. And I didn't know it yet. In Chinese spy operations, I didn't know what I was exposing. I didn't even realize how big it was at the time. But all I knew was I was onto something big. There was almost no reporting on it. There were almost no government reports on it. And I had a lot of people threatening to kill me. And I remember I kind of went into the cave, so to speak. I was in my house and I was really thinking, I was like, man, am I willing to die for this? For something that I was writing about, and a lot of people didn't even believe me at the time because no one had ever heard about a lot of this stuff. It's better known these days, but at that time it was not. And I said, am I willing to die for this? And I had to really think about it. But I decided, yeah, I would be willing to die for this, absolutely. And I realized the reason was a couple points. One, if I folded and gave up, I would be sending a message to them that anybody who comes after me, you can threaten them like you threatened me and they'll fold, that this is a working solution. And so I'd be setting up the next person to fail. And I was not willing to do that. I would be willing to die just for the sake of that, nothing else, if that was the case. The other side was, I realized that if I don't cover it, nobody else was. There was nothing really exposing this stuff at that time, and I was onto something, And I mean, lo and behold, we've seen since then the effect of the work. If I just gave up, then people would not know about what I believed at the time, and I think has now been shown to be one of the greatest national security threats to the United States. One of the greatest threats our country faces would have gone unreported. And I decided, yeah, I'm willing to die for this. And if they kill me, it'll make it better known. If they kill me, it'll make headlines everywhere, and people will know what happened. And so I decided, yeah, I'm not gonna stop, no matter what.
Well, it's great that you continued. Joshua Philipp, investigative reporter from Epoch Times. It was great to have you on California Insider.
Hey, always a pleasure. Thank you, C-Mac.
Let us know what you think of the Chinese Communist Party's influence in universities and beyond. You can always email me at siamak@californiainsider.com or comment. We read all of your emails and comments. I'm Siamak Khorrami, this is California Insider, and we'll see you next time.